All right. Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen. This is David Patrick Harry with Church of the Eternal Logos. And today I have an interesting stream. We're going to be talking about the God of climate change and reverting back to a pre-Christian era. And so what spawned today's stream has to do with actually a conversation we were having over in our think tank for premium members on my website. And this was, let's see, about a week and a half ago, maybe 2 weeks. And we were discussing at that point, Hurricane Helene had ransacked Asheville and destroyed and caused, major devastating damage there. And then Milton was right behind it. And we were talking about, I was showing some clips that I had come across, at least on X, of all these hurricanes in the Atlantic and how it was more numerous than usually during hurricane season. And we were talking a little bit about the Wyoming wildfires. If you guys weren't aware, I'll actually cover a little bit about that. And one of the members was discussing the lithium mines around Asheville, North Carolina, and how they speculated, and I think is now considerable evidence. I don't know if you guys saw, but it was like the North Carolina governor actually told people to not rebuild and just go somewhere else. Well, there is a lithium mine there that has been yet to be exploited, and the locals didn't want it. And so we were kind of discussing, the DARPA and the ability to manipulate weather patterns and all this different stuff. And that got us talking a little bit about, one of the members is in Greece, and he was saying, yeah, we just had terrible wildfires, and in one of the plains regions, the largest plains in Greece, they're now going to install all these wind turbines, and they use the wildfires as a sort of precondition to install all this green energy. And we started discussing how it's interesting that the climate change agenda, in a way, is a sort of technological, theurgic worship of pagan gods. We're talking about, obviously, Gaia. This is the central sort of deity. You guys are going to be familiar with Lovelock's Gaia hypothesis. We're not going to be diving into that. But how the worship of the planet is this meta narrative that is really the climate change. And I'll discuss this a little bit. This meta narrative, what's really changing is the cultural climate, and that climate change is really about a revolution in regards to our Christian values and our Christian civilization. And we were talking about how, they're using, there's much speculation about how the wildfire started in Wyoming. Over 73,000 acres destroyed, one of the largest ones in Wyoming history. And interestingly enough, it also happened in an area in which some minerals are found and would be wanting to be exploited by the US government. But again, the locals wish not to abide with that. And so, interestingly enough, those wildfires are majority on private property, not the federal lands that dominate basically half of Western Wyoming, but all on the private property. And of course, when you look at the narratives out online, it's that the wildfires are due to climate change, Hurricane Helene's due to climate change. Everything is due to climate change, right? And climate change is really a sort of unfalsifiable narrative that reinforces this general, what I would call progressive regression. And that's part of what this stream is about. Is I had a stream taken down called the progressive regression and the return to a pre-Christian civilization, in which in that stream I highlighted basically the ancient sins of the Old Testament: cannibalism, human sacrifice, bestiality, abortion, homosexuality, and the destruction of the nuclear family. That was really the gist of that stream. It got taken down. It's up on my website now from YouTube. Apparently it violated some of the TOS in that stream. Thank God they didn't give me a strike. But I was thinking, man, that was a really good stream. I like that topic, but I don't want to remake that whole stream. And so today I wanted to combine, and what I really thought about this conversation we had in the think tank meeting, looking at wind energy really about a sort of theurgic worship of the wind god, solar energy really a sort of theurgic worship of the solar god, and how none of this stuff actually does what it claims to do. We know that electrical vehicles are way more destructive to the environment than we're told, and especially regards to combustion engines and the use of fossil fuels. That's another thing I want to mention today, is that I've seen so many people, I can't believe that this is still a thing in 2024, that people think that oil comes from dinosaur bones. Obviously, we call them fossil fuels, and there was this whole narrative that got going years ago, but oil has nothing to do with dinosaurs. And oil is naturally occurring. And the whole claim here with climate change is that it produces carbon, CO2, and that this is detrimental to the environment. Yet at the same time, we're seeing the expansion of the ice caps. We're seeing the growth of the Amazon. And yet this climate change agenda wants to limit carbon, which we've talked about before, is really, again, a meta narrative about an attack on life itself. And so, discussing the god of climate change, obviously you guys already know where I'm going with this, and it is the evil one. And it's not that I'm against clean nature and preservation of the environment. Of course I am. As Christians, we are stewards of creation. That's what Adam was placed on earth for. That is our participation with God's creation and our stewardship of it. But what my point is that climate change is also bringing forth many other things. And I have all these different aspects to demonstrate to you guys. But I put a little bit of a document together to just highlight how climate change really is a meta narrative that is a religious orientation that really is about paganism. It's really about an undermining of Christian values. And my points are like homosexuality, transgenderism, multiplicity of sexual expression, human sacrifice, bestiality. I found all these articles and websites online promoting these things in the name of climate change. And so climate change and this idea that the world initially was cooling, and I have an article to show you that from the 60s, 70s, and 80s, the whole narrative was that we had a global cooling. And of course, that went out of style. And so then by the 1990s, we see that it's a global warming and that the planet's heating up. The ocean temperatures are heating up. The ice caps are melting in the ocean. Then Manhattan was supposed to be underwater, according to Al Gore, in like 2010 or something. Of course, we see that the water levels hasn't risen. Venice is still there. Venice would be your first example. If the oceans were dramatically rising, how could Venice still exist? Well, it is still there, and I have evidence to show that the ice caps are actually expanding. So climate change is really, in my mind, a meta narrative from the father of lies, indoctrinating people into a sort of pre-Christian pagan world in which, as we sacrifice our Christian foundation and our Christian morality, we are reverting back to a pre-Christian world, and that people subconsciously are literally worshiping these sort of pagan deities and worshiping their own hedonism and their sexual desires or their pleasure seeking, whatever it may be. And so, like this little document I put together and will be on the website, I wanted to kind of put together how climate change really is a religious orientation. I'm speaking beyond the Gaia hypothesis. For those of you who aren't familiar, James Lovelock, the Gaia hypothesis is the idea that the Earth itself is a sort of sentient entity that has all these feedback loops of the systematic feedback loops that sort of bring itself into the state of a living organism. The Earth itself is a living organism, and this has been used since the 70s by environmentalists to sort of talk about Mother Earth in a really ritualistic, religious, literal way. And I put together a few attributes of how. So here's 6 attributes of how this climate change really is a religious orientation, and that the God of lies, the father of lies, the evil one, Satan himself, is utilizing climate change to undermine our Christian civilization. And I think, and part of it is I was in a conversation with somebody and they were pretty based, kind of red pilled on certain topics. But then once the climate got brought up or the manipulation of weather got brought up, this was too far fetched. They went back to the sort of climate change, and it revolved, the conversation revolved back into this meta narrative, right? Where all these pieces fit together if you just agree to the meta narrative of climate change. And that's why it's now climate change. It's not global warming. It's not global cooling, because both those have kind of been disproven. So it's just climate change. And when you look at religion, I utilized one of, if you're familiar with Emile Durkheim, he has this famous book. He was a French sociologist, The Elementary Forms of Religious Life. He has some interesting stuff, but one of the points that I wanted to highlight is that he talks about totemic symbols, and he was looking at like totem poles and Aboriginal traditions in Australia, and how all these pagan animistic groups, they would choose a animal, a symbol, and that would be the totem pole. It'd be at the top of the totem pole, and it would unify the whole collective. And I made the point here that really the totemic symbol of climate change is the Earth itself. And so when you hear no borders, no wall, no USA at all, the dissolution, Agenda 21, the dissolution of national boundaries, the dissolution of countries, the dissolution of racial groups and identity, the Earth is a perfect symbol for that, because it focuses on a single point, right? It's not about individual people. It's not about individual specific ideology. It's this global unifying structure. And I have an article, or at least a website, highlighting that the origins of this global warming or the global climate change actually comes out of the Club of Rome. And in 1991, they highlighted that one of the ways in which they could unify all people to create a sort of abstract enemy is to use pollution, because nobody's in favor of polluting the environment, obviously. But yet, even me just coming out and being critical of climate change as a religious meta narrative, I can already see that people would begin to highlight, oh my gosh, how could you say that? How could you say that? Don't you want a clean environment? Of course I do. Of course I do. But there's an interesting theory that's put forth, and I kind of use it in my work, called post-secularism. And Jürgen Habermas, part of the Frankfurt School, not a huge fan of the Frankfurt School, but he put forward that post-secularism, like postmodernism or post-humanism, post-secularism is of the current moment in which we live in the 21st century, in which secular and religious narratives no longer are distinct dichotomies. Instead, everything is a meaning-making process in the post-secular world, and anything can become a religious narrative. And I use this sort of theoretical structure to talk about transhumanism, but the same thing would apply to climate change. Climate change is a post-secular meta-narrative with a totemic symbol of the earth. And this is why when you look at, I was looking at various environmental groups and climate change, it's always a green symbol, the symbol of the earth. And they have their own beliefs and dogmas. At the heart of the most religious systems are a set of beliefs and truths that guide behavior and worldview. The climate change movement is grounded in the belief that the planet is a state environmental crisis due to our human activity. So it's our own sins. You and I are guilty for what's occurring. It's our own sins that we must be redeemed from. And therefore, we have to practice various forms of sacrifice. And that's where, like the World Economic Forum, you'll own nothing and you'll like it. This is part of your sacrifice, right? Because the fact that the first world countries are able to industrialize and be able to have commodities and live a higher quality of life, this is a problem because it disenfranchises the third world. Meanwhile, what I'll show you guys is that all this green energy actually disenfranchises the third world. When Germany went on to green energy, the people who were most affected by it were the poor. That right now, the utilization of green energy and the green agenda by the UN is actually disenfranchising the poorest countries in the world, namely Africa. And so how ironic, the people who are promoting social justice, equality, all this different stuff, they themselves are actually the biggest contributors to the detrimental effects of what they're pushing against the people who they say they're trying to claim or try to save, right? And so this is really a belief, a dogmatic structure within the climate change narrative, and that this is often framed as a moral and existential terms. The planet must be saved, and failure to act will result in catastrophe. These beliefs become dogmatic in nature when dissent or alternative perspectives are merely debated but cast as heretical, right? One of the things, again, just looking up information and trying to find contrary viewpoints for today's stream, it is amazing. I won't be surprised. For example, just to show you how powerful this climate change meta narrative is, I bet by the end of the stream, or at least by tomorrow, there will be a Wikipedia link under this video on YouTube telling you about the legitimacy of everything that we're going to be discussing concerning global warming and climate change and all this different stuff. Why is that so important? Because it really is an overall religious meta narrative. And climate change has its own ethical framework. Similar to religious ethics, the climate change agenda promotes a moral framework that dictates individual and collective behavior. Concepts like carbon footprint, sustainable living, and renewable energy function as moral imperatives where individuals are encouraged to act in ways that minimize harm to the planet, Mother Nature, the goddess. Akin to religious precepts that guide one toward virtue. There's also the notion of repentance and atonement, right? Those who have been historically complicit in environmental degradation, often identified as industrialized nations or corporations, must seek atonement through reparations, green technology, and policy changes. And so is it not ironic then that it's the first world nations who are guilty of climate change that are being inundated with various migrants who were told then that this is all due to climate change and that their home countries are being devastated by climate change, in which, again, I have another article highlighting that this just isn't the case. And multiple countries, including Greece, have come out and said this isn't the case. Why? What is with this narrative that these first world nations must take in all these migrants on the basis of climate change and preserving? Well, it's part of this repentance. It's part of this satanic inversion of religion, specifically Christianity and this worship of nature. And so it has a salvation narrative. It's salvific, right? Much like religion's narratives that offer salvation or enlightenment, the climate change movement often presents a vision of global redemption. By transitioning to green energy, reducing emissions, and adopting sustainable practices, the human race can be saved from impending disaster. This eschatological view parallels religious doctrines of an apocalypse, an ecopocalypse, if you will, followed by renewal or paradise, where the earth can either be a place of destruction or redemption. And so, unlike the transhumanist eschatological narrative, that's not so many people are going to be on board with that. But the climate change narrative, I really do believe, is the ultimate meta narrative that unifies all this different stuff. For example, patriarchy. I have articles you can, if you just search in the problems with patriarchy or the cause of patriarchy and climate change, you'll find tons of stuff talking about how Christianity is the blame. In fact, one of the women in the counterculture in America in the 1960s, she wrote, I believe it was in 1967, literally wrote that the degradation of the environment is solely responsible to Christianity, and that Christianity's upheaval of paganism was the ultimate psychic revolution, and that therefore it must be undone. And so, right there from the beginning of the environmental movement, obviously, you can point to Rachel Carson and the Silent Springs and all this different stuff. And again, I'm not in favor of DDT being in the water and the environment, anything like that. But we can see the meta narrative, the spiritual underpinnings of this thing. It really is a religious orientation, and it really is a vehicle for the evil one to subvert Christianity and the foundations of what our civilization is built upon. And so this eschatological view parallels, again, the apocalypse followed by a renewal or paradise. It has its own prophets and saviors, right? I wasn't even aware that Greta Thunberg she has been given an honorary doctorate in theology. I kid you not. I'm going to show you guys this here in just a bit. Greta Thunberg, who didn't even go to much of her high school or middle school and all this stuff because she's been promoting and trying to stop climate change, right? And now she's kind of been canceled because she's pro-Palestine. You guys probably can connect the dots there. But I had no idea that she was actually given an honorary doctorate, a honorary PhD in theology. For what? In theology? Oh, because this is really about a religious narrative, a religious orientation, a returning back to a pre-Christian civilization. And I have all these articles talking about depopulation. You cannot discuss climate change without discussing the overpopulation narrative. And I have even David Attenborough, right? Who I love watching, Planet Earth and all the different animal documentaries that he's been a part of. But he's a huge, huge proponent of the idea that there's too many people on the planet and we need to depopulate, all in the name of saving nature. Again, it kind of brings you back to these ancient pagan sacrifices in which human beings would literally be sacrificed to the nature gods for rain, for warmth, for a good harvest. So they have their own prophets and saviors. Just as religious traditions have their prophets and messianic figures, the climate movement has its own leaders who are seen as voices of truth and reason, scientists, activists, and influential figures like Greta Thunberg and Al Gore, who's been wrong about every single prediction he's put forth yet. These figures often carry a moral authority, urging humanity to repent from its environmental sins and change its ways, like religious prophets who call for a moral reform. They have their own rituals and community. The climate change agenda has fostered a sense of global community, where individuals and organizations gather at conferences, obviously the UN climate change conferences being one of the largest ones, and participate in rituals of environmental activism. Whether it's through Earth Day celebrations, tree planting ceremonies, or organized climate strikes, or blocking traffic while you're trying to get to work, these acts resemble religious rituals that bind communities together through a shared belief and action. And of course, they also have their own sacred texts and teachings. And religion's sacred texts serve as repositories of wisdom and guidance. In the climate change movement, scientific reports such as those by the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, the IPCC, you'll probably see that in some of our documents today, and documentaries function in a similar capacity, offering knowledge, warnings, and guidance for the future. Now, one of the things that I've seen over and over is that when you get to see, people will talk about science, trust the science. But interestingly, just like 2020, the COOF and climate change, all these scientists then refer back to consensus. Well, consensus and appeal to authority is not science. And in fact, that's not how science is done. Show me some empirical data. And when you look at some of the empirical data, it doesn't really jive with the entire meta narrative of climate change. And so, what I argue is really going on here is this is reversion back to paganism. And so, what are the similarities of climate change and paganism? The earth is a sacred entity, right? Gaia, Gaia worship. You guys are already familiar with this. I don't need to go into it. A nature centered spirituality, the anthropomorphizing of nature, right? In pagan traditions, God and goddesses represent various aspects of the natural world. For example, the sun god Helios. And in here, notice again, we use these technological means for like solar panels when solar panels are actually incredibly toxic, devastate habitat, and really don't do the thing that they say that they're supposed to do. And I'm not against solar energy per se, but the same thing's true with wind, right? Wind is actually devastating to birds and bats. Bats are actually attracted to the sound of the wind turbines because they believe that they're getting closer to a water source, usually the ocean of some sort. And there's multiple. One of the things that I was astonished by is the propaganda protecting the belief that these offshore wind farms, if you're familiar, have nothing to do with all these whales washing up on shore, right? This was a big one that I wasn't expecting the amount of articles protecting this. So I will spend literally, hours just searching stuff online, trying to see what I can comb through. And I'll change the search phrase. I'll put it as a positive. I'll put it as a negative just to see what articles come up. And one of the hardest ones to find was anything regarding wind turbines and offshore wind farms having devastating effects to sea life, coral reefs, and particularly mammals like dolphins and whales who communicate through sonar. And there's all these interesting reports of whales washing up on shore in large numbers around these offshore wind turbines. And so my point here about this pagan worship and climate change, it's as if they're using an appeal to these wind deities, the solar deities, the deities of water, Poseidon, all this different stuff, is that they're really, in a way, through the abortion, through the human sacrifice, through the massive again, just the degeneracy that our culture is putting forth. This is like a sacrificial offer for the people who are controlling us, the evil people who are actually in charge here, to revert through theurgic technological means to destroy the thing that they say they're trying to preserve. That's what it appears to be to me. And so whether it be the wind, the sea, the harvest, right? I was looking at when harvest, I started to look up stuff, and I made it exit out a few of them, but I was looking up Monsanto's role in climate change, and turns out they're a huge promoter in climate change. Monsanto, well, aren't they the ones responsible for all these GMOs? Aren't they the ones that are responsible for all these pesticides and chemicals that farmers use that actually run off into the water and really are making the frogs gay? Interesting. So they are saving the environment while at the same time destroying it. And that seems to be the common denominator here. And so I wanted to point out then, what are some of the central features of paganism? Well, obviously polytheism. So we can just say a rejection of the one true God, the Holy Trinity. So this is a defining feature of almost all pagan traditions. They have multiple deities, be it Norse, be it Greek, be it Chinese, whatever pagan society you want to look at. And then animism and nature worship. Obviously, they worship animals and nature worship, and this is clearly a central feature of the climate change meta-narrative. And then rituals and sacrifice. Rituals, including sacrificing, were central to pagan religious life, including the sacrificing of private property. You will own nothing and you will like it. Well, why do I have to own nothing and like it? Well, you have to save the environment, because not everybody can live the standard of life that is people have been accommodated to for the last 30, 40 years in first world nations. Oh, so I don't get to choose, but I have to sacrifice my well-being and ability to raise and provide for a family to save the planet. Meanwhile, they're also doing abortion. And I have multiple articles talking about how don't have children, save the environment, how having children's a bad idea. Get a pet, get a dog, get a cat. don't have children. In fact, that's going to slow down your life. You're not going to be able to have so much fun. So in the name of the sacrifice here is that you pursue your hedonism so that you sacrifice any true meaning. And I believe that there's a spiritual ritual going on here in which we are sacrificing human entities, human souls, actual human sacrifice to perpetuate this weird, magical, demonic structure of climate change agenda and controlling the planet itself. And so sacrifices, whether of animals, crops, or in some cases humans, were made to appease and honor the gods. Well, we're going to honor Gaia by having my fifth abortion, right? There's literally articles about this. These rituals were performed to ensure fertility, victory in battle, or good fortune, among other outcomes. So you want to have a good fortune, you want to make a lot of money and be able to go to all the concerts that you won and travel the world. Well, don't have children. Oh, you're pregnant? Just get an abortion. Human sacrifice was especially notable in certain pagan traditions like ancient Celts and Norse and some pre-Columbian Mesoamerican societies. And then pagan traditions usually have mystery religions and secret knowledge. You guys can get that. Eleusinian mysteries, again, dedicated to Demeter and Persephone. Persephone goes to the underworld, Demeter, her mother, and it has to do about her journey to the underworld and then her return. And it has to do with the sort of regenerative process of nature and the harvest itself. And then, of course, in paganism, you have diversity of sexual and gender practices. Pagan cultures tend to have more fluid and diverse view of sexuality and gender roles compared to Christianity. Oh, interesting. Practices such as homosexuality, transgenderism, and the acceptance of various sexual practices were more prevalent in many pagan societies, though these attitudes varied from culture to culture. Some deities, such as the androgynous Dionysius in Greek mythology, or gods like Freyr in Norse mythology, embodied complex gender identities, which, of course, we've talked about Baphomet, the Knights Templar construction of the half humanoid, half goat entity that has female breasts and male genitalia, all this different stuff, right? And so here I list a few of the key differences, 5 of the key differences between these pagan traditions and Christianity. And you tell me if it seems like these pagan traditions are more synonymous with this climate change meta-narrative, this religious orientation, and how everything that Christianity stands against is being undermined. And so human sacrifice, the first one, human sacrifice was a notable practice in several pagan traditions, especially in times of crisis or as part of religious rituals. The Celts, for instance, practiced human sacrifice in certain contexts, as did some Semitic religions, such as the Canaanite worship of Moloch, where children were sometimes sacrificed, oftentimes sacrificed. And I have a thing from Tertullian actually talking about this, an early church apologists. And so Christianity's condemnation. How did Christianity feel about human sacrifice? Christianity categorically condemned human sacrifice as barbaric and immoral, including abortion. And in fact, Tertullian's quote talked about how killing a baby, be it in the womb or after it's born, to Moloch is an abomination to the Christian faith. The Christian narrative of sacrifice was transformed with the sacrifice of Christ on the cross, seen as the ultimate and final offering for the sins of humanity. This rejection of literal sacrifice was one of the most profound differences between early Christianity and its pagan counterparts. Okay, what about bestiality? In some pagan myths and rituals, bestiality was present, though it was not necessarily widespread or normative across all pagan traditions. Greek mythology, for example, includes numerous stories of gods transforming into animals and engaging in sexual relations with humans, such as Zeus in the form of a bull or a swan. Now, I have an article from Cambridge University Press. Cambridge University Press, supposed to be, again, this austere, high-to-do intellectual press, literally promoting bestiality as a form of animal advocacy. So I kid you not, I'm going to show you guys this. The way it's described itself is that bestiality can actually be a form of animal advocacy. And this is, again, we see the regeneration of paganism and the reversion to a pre-Christian civilization. So how did Christianity feel about bestiality? Christianity strongly condemned bestiality as a perversion of human sexuality and a violation of natural law. The Bible explicitly forbids such practices, Leviticus 18:23, and it became a taboo that was treated with severity in Christian doctrine, meaning um, probably execution. That if somebody caught you, again, sorry for all the people in the Afghani mountains who are getting lonely with their goats, but that was certainly not something that was promoted in the Old Testament nor the second covenant with Christ. What about pedophilia? And we've already seen, we discussed multiple times minor attracted persons. I discussed my experience when I was living in Berkeley, California, that I witnessed even professors talking about minor attracted persons as being part of the LGBTQ blah 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 spectrum, and that this is overly stigmatized, and that the age of consent should be lowered. Of course, Alan Dershowitz, the Jewish lawyer for Trump, actually, he is very much in favor of lowering the age. Of course, he was on the Epstein list and all that different stuff. So in certain pagan societies, particularly in ancient Greece and Rome, relationships between adult men and adolescent boys were socially acceptable and even institutionalized, especially in educational or mentorship contexts. The practice of pederasty, for example, was part of Greek culture, though was often carried its own rules and boundaries. And how did Christianity feel about that? Christianity rejected pedophilia as immoral. Christian teachings emphasized the sanctity of marriage, which was generally expected to be between a man and a woman, and sexual relations outside this covenant, particularly with children, were condemned as sinful. And again, execution was often dealt with. What about homosexuality? Again, all these things were present within the pagan tradition, and I'm going to show you guys through articles here in just a minute. All these things are being promoted in the name of climate change. How ironic. Attitudes toward homosexuality varied in different pagan cultures. In ancient Greece and Rome, homosexual relations were sometimes accepted, particularly among men. The same can be seen in various other pagan cultures where gender fluidity and same-sex relationships were integrated into religious practice. Christian doctrine condemned homosexual acts as unnatural and sinful. The Bible includes several passages that forbid homosexuality. Early Christian teachings emphasize heterosexual marriage as the only acceptable context for sexual activity, making a stark contrast with more permissive attitudes found in some pagan societies. And then last but not least, transgenderism and gender fluidity. So I found articles talking about how the trans community is mostly affected by the climate change agenda because they are a disenfranchised community, and therefore, as climate change wrecks our civilization, it's going to be people of color and the LGBTQ community, they're going to take the brunt of it. And therefore, to preserve the sanctity of transgender identity and homosexual relationships, we must fight climate change. You must give up oil. You must give up private property. You must give up your autonomy. And so many pagan traditions feature deities and rituals that embrace gender fluidity or androgyny, i.e., again, we've talked about Baphomet before. We're not going to be focusing on him too much today. In ancient Mesopotamian religions, the goddess Inanna or Ishtar was associated with gender-bending rituals, and the priests of her cult were sometimes transgender or androgynous. Similarly, the Norse god Loki could shapeshift and sometimes take on female forms. Christianity traditionally upheld a binary understanding of gender, emphasizing that God created male and female with distinct roles. The idea of transgender identity or fluid gender roles was not accepted within traditional Christian doctrine, which promoted a fixed understanding of gender as part of the created order. Gender bending or cross-traditional boundaries was seen as a transgression against divine law. And one of the interesting things, again, you can find, and you guys could do this right now while you're watching, is just go on and put in climate change and religion. At least I use the Brave browser. The first things that come up are all these progressive Christian Protestant churches talking. Again, you see the LGBTQ. All the articles are almost all written by women. And they're promoting the idea that Christianity is about acceptance, Christianity is about stewardship, and therefore we need to do everything we can to protect the environment and protect the LGBTQ people and their sexual expressions, because they are expressing themselves and how they're made uniquely in the image of God. Of course, no objective moral standard whatsoever. And here's a few things. We don't need to get into it too much, but the role of the body was certainly different. For paganism, they viewed the body as a vessel of divine experience and a vehicle for pleasure. Again, a central point in the meta narrative of climate change, with a focus on physicality in religious rituals and celebrations. Fertility rites, sexual rituals, and physical sacrifices were seen as a way to connect with the divine. Christianity, while recognizing the goodness of the body as part of creation, also emphasized the need to discipline and control bodily desires. Sexuality was to be regulated within the confines of marriage, and asceticism was praised as a way to draw closer to God by subjugating physical desires for a higher spiritual goal. And so the last thing, in you guys already know, is that most pagan worldviews were cyclical, where Christianity has a linear timeline. Christianity believes that God created the world. We believe in a creator deity. He creates the world. There's a middle point and there's an end, just like every story, just like every life, just like everything that comes into existence. There's a beginning, a middle, and an end. Christianity believes that's the exact same thing with history. That's the exact same thing with the universe. And so multiverse theories, all these different things, these are really contemporary scientific theories that are totally abstract and not built on empirical evidence. They're just really abstract conceptions. But what it allows for is a retaining of a sort of ancient pagan cyclical worldview, which then allows for all this other stuff to come in as well. So I want to now show you guys some of these articles that I found. So smash that like. Shout out to Father Deacon Doctor. He says, I would say a better phrase is eschatological view of time and not linear. Well, the reason why I phrased it that way is because even in Hinduism, they have the Kali Yugas. And so they believe in a sort of eschatology in the sense that there's a endpoint within cycles and that it blows up and then it reverts back to a new beginning point, a new cycle, a new yuga. But I would say one of the defining features is a sort of beginning and end point of history. And so if you want to define that as linear or not, fair enough, Father Deacon. God bless you, brother, and also your wife. We need to do a stream. We got to do a stream. I just got back. We got to do a stream sometime. He said, I was just worried about Hegelian. Yeah, I can see that. Touche. Love you, Father Deacon. God bless you, brother. Anyways, I just want to do some quick smash that like, guys. I got tons of stuff to show you now, the kind of reinforcing everything that I put forth here. I see that we got a couple super chats. Josiah Elleron throws in $5, no comment. And Josiah threw in another $5. Thank you so much, Josiah. He says, thanks for being such an amazing example of being a Christian man and leader. Well, thank you so much, Josiah. I hope I can, but I certainly don't want to call myself that, because as soon as you do, that's when that's when the evil one comes and gets you. So I'm just doing my best. Pray for me and my wife. And thank you very much for your support, guys. Also, if you want to support the stream, please send in a super chat using Streamlabs or Dono Chat. Or if you prefer YouTube, feel free to use YouTube. Or, oh my gosh, Beyond Seraphim just threw in 5 COTEL Crew memberships. Thank you so much, Beyond Seraphim. He just gifted 5 COTEL Crew memberships. Let me see who got those. Shout out to Joy, GSP, Overlord 3001. Wicked Wally got one. Shout out to Wicked Wally. And Eek was all gifted a COTEL Crew membership. So thank you so much, Beyond Seraphim, from the support. Again, if you guys are in a generous spirit, please gift some memberships. I know the community loves that, and it's a great way to support my work and everything. So let me just let me just show you guys, do a quick little housekeeping as usual, and then I want to get straight back into it. If you want to support my work, one of the best things you can do is go become a website member. Again, that document I just presented, along with all the other documents, are available at my website. This is the stream that got taken down, the progressive regression, reverting back to a pre-Christian world. And And so I'm combining that with a discussion on climate change here. But all these documents, the theology of marriage, techno-feminism overview, I'm putting those together before the stream and making those available. So if you're a website member for $5 a month, you can get access to all that. Please do that. It's a great way to support my work. Or if you want to join our private think tank meeting, we have a meeting tomorrow night at 7:00 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. It's a group of, well, all men. Not that you have to be a man, but that's the way it's kind of, it's the way the cookie crumbled, if you will. And so we are all over the world. We get together and we kind of discuss the latest things happening in a private group setting with like-minded people. If that's something you'd be interested in, sign up as a premium member. Also, if anybody would like to sign up for a one-on-one session, you can do so right here with that link. And if you are interested in sponsoring a stream, we got some sponsored streams. The next one coming is Russia Before the Second Coming. If you have a topic you would like me to do a stream on, feel free to sponsor a stream and I will do that and present that in a live stream here on the channel. Also, if you're feeling real generous, feel free to get some COTEL Crew t-shirts. We got a bunch of stuff over there. And also, if you're interested in a lot of the stuff I've been talking about with eschatology, go check out the eschatonvigil.org, the eschatonvigil.org. This is a non-for-profit that I'm working with. And I haven't done much, but he has been translating tons of work that was previously only available in Greek, Russian, Serbian, Romanian, Bulgarian, and making the visions and the prophecies about the end times of Orthodox saints, specifically Orthodox saints, available in English for the first time. So if you want to get access to some of that stuff, go over there. And I also, if you are in the market for some Orthodox products, check out orthodoxdepot.com. It's a great Orthodox company here in the Midwest. They have icons, incense lamps, prayer ropes, whatever it may be. Use promo code COTEL. You'll get 10% off, and you'll be able to help me out as well as a good Orthodox company here in the U.S. So thank you guys for hearing me out there and doing a little housekeeping. So smash that like. And now let's get into what I wanted to show you guys. So here is one of the first things I mentioned. It just happened to be the tab that is pulled up right now. And this is the Cambridge University Press advocates for bestiality. Wow. And this is in 2021. And so an article by Kathy Rudd titled LGBTQ ... Z was published on March 25th, 2020 by Cambridge University Press. And in this issue of Hypatia, the special issue, Animal Others, published in 2020 under Cambridge Core, the Cambridge Core is described on its website as the home of academic content from Cambridge University Press. And the article's abstract claims that bestiality is a new form of animal advocacy and relies on queer theory to make its argument. Oh, wow. Wonderful. So if you want to read that whole article, here it is right here. So here's the abstract. I draw discourses around bestiality and zoophilia into the realm of queer theory in order to point out a new form of animal advocacy, something that might be called a shorthand loving animals. My argument is quite simple. It all interdicts against bestiality depend on a firm notion of what exactly sex is. And if queer theory disrupts the firm foundation by arguing that sexuality is possible to define beforehand and pervades many different kinds of relations, then viewing bestiality as a frame of queer theory can give us another way to conceptualize the limitations of human exceptionalism. Oh, wow. Okay. So, just wanting to highlight that. I'll share this link with you guys. I'm going to share all these links with you guys as I go through. So if I miss one, remind me. Yeah, graduate school garbage. That's what bourgeois beatnik says. Yeah. Oh, it's sad. It's really sad. So we'll begin through the beginning here, and I'll just run through. So if you're understanding what I was talking about, totemic symbols, that's just a reference to the elementary forms of religious life here by Emile Durkheim, the French sociologist, the founder of sociology. And we don't need to get into it, but it has to do with these totemic symbols that societies orient themselves around. And so my point was that the climate change agenda uses the totemic symbol of the earth. Now, here's a video I wanted to show, but again, we just have so much to get through that I probably will not, unless you guys in the chat really want me to play some Marshall McLuhan. This is a video of him talking about the global village, and he's talking about, again, the effects of media and how this is moving us back to a tribal man. And so, well, why don't we go ahead and watch it? It's actually really good. And so the point being is that climate change and this large meta narrative, this religious orientation that we're trying to document and kind of move through today, without electrical technology, without digital media, it wouldn't be as effective as it is. And he makes the point, and you're about to hear him, is that during the Renaissance, or during the period in which people read books, that a person was isolated. They were pulled away from the society, from the collective, and they were able to form their own perspective, their own opinions about topics, a true individualism. And what's happening with the effects of media is that electronic man is really a global man. He's a tribal man. He's more concerned about what the global village is doing. And he's arguing here that this technology is actually creating this global village effect. And so let's just watch the, 5 minutes here, and check this out, because I think it's really, really interesting. And a lot of people, unfortunately, still are not familiar with Marshall McLuhan, and you should be. You absolutely should be. So here we go. I want to make one point before we move on here, and he's talking about how romance and the romantic novel, the romantic understanding of love, was tied with print culture. And what did we just talk about, looking at all these dimensions of sexuality and gender expression within paganism? And he's making the point here that as we move into electronic mediums, because everything is happening at once, the global village, the entire earth is happening at once. You can get news anywhere. And Marshall McLuhan predicted the internet in like 1964, before he was even aware of it, but he predicted that something like this was going to occur. And it's changing the sensory ratios of man, in which he is moving away from the historical man of literature, the historical man that really Christianity shaped, and moving back to a pre-literate man, a man who's focused on the auditory. And this is true even with us. I mean, I've talked with so many people that say, oh, I don't really read books. I'd rather just listen to it because I can understand it better. And rightfully so. I'm not here to condemn anybody. But my point being is that sensory ratio is part and parcel of living in an electronic digital world. That your sensory ratios, the senses in which dominate your faculty to learn and communicate and take in information, are altered through the mediums in which we utilize. Okay, so anyways, I just wanted to highlight that the climate change narrative, this meta narrative, couldn't exist without, again, the sensory ratios, the shifting of perspective, and the divorcing of us from literate man. Now, the next thing I want to point out here is, again, getting back to the climate change narrative, is that the same people, NASA, these federal agencies that are constantly telling us about climate change, and every storm, every snowfall that comes, it's from climate change. Every heat wave that emerges, it's from climate change. Every flood, every hurricane, it's from climate change. Meanwhile, they themselves are manipulating the weather. Again, to me, this is part of this theurgic ritual in which these powers that be, through the energy of human sacrifice, are utilizing technology to sort of, how you want to say, in a way, commune with these pagan deities of nature. And so this is just a quick clip, not talking about any of that, but highlighting how we know that Hurricane Helene, the U.S. government has already admitted that it was manipulating the hurricane. And I just want to play this real quick for you guys so that you can see it as well. So check this out.
Congress is now confirming that Hurricane Helena did have U.S. government weather weapon planes in it. Now, we already have the tracks. We already have the tail numbers. They don't even hide this crap. It just broke. It's on Infowars.com. Breaking: lawmakers briefed on weather modification tech conclude Hurricane Helena was DOD-linked weather weapon deployed against American people. Bombshell. There's Dale Whittington, who we're getting on the show, I think, tomorrow. So there you go, of Geoengineering Watch with Colonel McGregor. Let's go ahead and air these two clips back to back.
The question here is, how does this hurricane's path differ from others that we've seen? I've already had a lot of people call me from the Asheville area, talk specifically about the horrendous damage, and many of them pointed out that that is not Hurricane Alley per se. It's not an area that normally attracts storms. Can you help us understand this?
Well, the bottom line is it was directed there, as the transmission recordings clearly show. They kept that moisture corralled there to deluge in the same location. So again, these are patented technologies, and the fact that we have the entire so-called meteorological community denying that this is going on to protect their paychecks and pensions is absolutely criminal at this point. We know we have private defense contractors that are neck deep in the patents that manipulate these storms, Raytheon, Lockheed Martin. We know those two in particular do the weather modeling for the nation's weathermen, National Weather Service and NOAA. Again, both agencies have an illegal federal gag order on them. So at this point, this is an emperor has no clothes moment. That's the best description I can give for something that is so blatantly obvious and inarguable, can only be considered weather warfare at this point. And the fact that, again, the so-called science community is denying this manipulation is criminal. It's absolutely criminal, Colonel McGregor.
If you can do so, could you tell us about some of your recent discussions, conversations, briefings that you've had with political leaders from the states in question that have asked you what you think? First of all, what did they specifically ask you, if you can tell us, and how did they respond to your answers?
Yes, Colonel McGregor, I had an hour conference call yesterday with the representatives and senators from the Carolinas, and we presented the data to them to answer their questions about how this manipulation occurs. They realized this was not a natural event. They're trying to digest the fact that their states were literally under assault from weather modification operations that are clearly connected with DoD operations, and we can speculate again on the agendas and objectives being carried out, but the fact that the storm was manipulated is absolutely inarguable. We know that technology to stop these rotations from even occurring has existed for decades with the manipulation of atmospheric pressure zones. HAARP in Alaska is one example many people are familiar with. That's an ionosphere heater. That's a weapon of mass destruction, period. It can cause an electrical chain reaction in the ionosphere, which heats it to extraordinarily high temperatures, which causes the atmosphere to bulge up and down. The downward push creates a high pressure dome that can steer the jet stream. And the same type of manipulation can create low pressure zones. When they have this type of power over the climate system, they can make or break these storms anytime they want. And again, what we see now is storms kept weaker as they're over the ocean because they're harder to steer until they reach the land-based network of transmitters. And then we have, Colonel McGregor, rapid intensification. You've heard that term probably a lot lately, because that's how they manipulate these storms. And again, we have Acapulco last October being the extreme example.
Back it up 15 seconds. He's the head of Geoengineering Watch, Dane Whittington. He's on tomorrow for...
Okay, so you guys get the point in that, again, the same people that are promoting the climate narrative that you need to give away your private property, that the entire moral basis of Christianity needs to be undermined, are also manipulating the weather and have technologies that many of us are totally unaware of. And shout out to Mendoza. He threw in $5. Thank you so much, brother. He says, like the stream if you're not a gay, Greta, simping, soy guzzler. Appreciate you, brother. God bless you and the family. Hope you guys are doing well. Do smash that like. And so that was the only point of bringing that up. And another thing that I want to highlight is, obviously there's a lot of speculation about the lithium mines there in North Carolina that have been discovered, and the companies, and along with the federal government contracts that they've signed to mine that lithium, of which the local people in Nashville did not want to occur. And there's already been a release of the North Carolina governor telling people not to rebuild after the destruction of their town where this lithium mine is, and that they need to go build somewhere else. And so the directing of these storms, the destruction of nature, and the same thing's true with Hawaii. Remember in Maui, again, the weird phenomenon that Obama's house that had the blue roof wasn't caught on fire, which was really just meters away from the other people's homes that were totally destroyed and like blue cars being untouched, but everything else burning. And now we see that Maui's going to be turning into a smart city, of which, again, the same players, BlackRock, State Street, all these players are now investing in creating a smart grid, and they're telling the peoples that they can no longer rebuild where they had been living for years. The same thing is true. And I want to highlight something regarding Wyoming that a lot of people were not aware of. And so I'm going to play this quick video as well relating to, again, very interesting occurrences. And this one was hardly covered. I don't even know if it was covered by the national media. I saw a few references to it, but very, very few.
So if you haven't heard, Wyoming's on fire. And what's interesting is the majority of it is on the eastern side of Wyoming. Now, just for reference, the yellow part of this map is federally owned land, and the white part is privately owned. These major fires are all in the privately owned sectors. Now, what does this mean? So a recent discovery claims that there is approximately 2.34 billion metric tons of rare earth minerals near Wheatland, Wyoming, which is on fire. Now, with this supply of rare earth minerals, we would be the leading holder in the entire world. Now, where is Wheatland? Right there in the southeast corner of Wyoming, where the worst of the fires are. Now, this won't be an overnight transition. Many proposals still face months, if not years, before work is final. But the citizens of Wyoming are poised to fight long and hard against these mines. Now, what started these wildfires? So a wet or an area with an abundance of fuels just so happened to get hit by lightning and ignited the fuel. And the state's notoriously strong winds are driving the flames, making it even worse. Sounds kind of like the perfect storm. So I don't know, people, you can put two and two together here. We have a location that could be the leading source of rare earth minerals in a certain part of Wyoming that a lot of people are against mining, and now they're being told to evacuate. I can't say much more, but look into this. So if you haven't heard.
So just bringing that to your guys' attention if you weren't aware. And this was a thing regarding how this is a little bit of a history in regards, and I'll share this link as well, concerning how the government has the history of their manipulating weather and creating and directing hurricanes. But anyways, we'll move on from here. So there's a guy that I want you guys to be aware of that is really, really good in regards to the research concerning the history of climate change and how it really is not backed up by empirical evidence. And his name's Tony Heller. And he has his own blog, which is right here, Real Climate Science. And he has degrees and is part and parcel of this climate community, but he's very outspoken against many of the narratives that exist right now. And so here's just one thing that he's put together, the history of modern climate change scam. And so what this does is highlight the whole history. And this is so interesting. I went to AI. I went to Chat GPT it was on Brave browser. And I just put in the history of climate change. I wanted to see if it would even address the entire 60s, 70s, and 80s about global cooling. And lo and behold, it did not. It did not even address it. The whole thing created a timeline from like the late 1700s through the 1800s, 1900s, all about people speculating about how the planet was warming. So very interesting. So for those who aren't aware, I want to present this information, and that in January 1972, the National Science Foundation held a meeting at Brown University to discuss climatic change, then meant global cooling, which they said was of a natural origin. And so here you can see, when will the present interglacial end? It says the present global cooling, which reversed the warm trend from the 1940s, is still underway, even though man-made pollution may have contributed to the observed fluctuations, meaning it's making it colder. The bulk of the change is probably of natural origin. The present cooling is especially demonstrable in certain key regions in Arctic and subarctic latitudes. When will the present? Okay. And so he has all the links. Let me share this link with you before I forget. His work is great because he provides links to every document that he finds. Later that year, the participants sent a letter to President Nixon warning of a new ice age within a century. And here, this is the peace, dear Mr. President, Brown University, talking about how substantially lowered food production, increased frequency and amplitude of extreme weather. Same thing that we're told now, but instead of warming, it's cooling. And so the White House seized on the global cooling threat. This is the Bureau of International Scientific and Technological Affairs. I've requested that your letter be circulated to the members of the Interdepartmental Committee for Atmospheric Sciences for review and appropriate action. Okay. And then NASA's top climate science experts predicted a new ice age by the year 2021. Wow, interesting. How could they be so wrong? And so the U.S. scientists sees new ice age coming. This is an article out of the Washington Post. Let's see, 1973, or no, it was published in 1971, it looks like. And then here's the U.S. military responded to global cooling, which they said was causing extreme weather. Here's the Defense Advanced Research Projects Agency, 1973. Everything which now gets blamed on global warming was blamed on global cooling. So you can see right here, crop failures, drought in Soviet Union, shortfall of grain production, collapse of Peruvian anchovy harvest, anomalous low precipitation in Pacific Northwest, depleted water reserve. Scientists realized that global cooling was a potential big money scam for them. In 1974, the New York Times reported on a meeting of climate experts in Germany. There was a unanimous consensus that global cooling threatened the world's food supply. Wow. Here you can see that. Walter Orr Roberts of NCAR was a key player behind this. Here you can see, again, some of their articles. In 1974, the CIA said global cooling would produce drought, famine, international conflict, and political unrest throughout the world. So, and here's the CIA document right here. There is, moreover, growing consensus among leading climatologists that the world is undergoing a cooling trend. If it continues as feared, it could restrict production in both the USSR and China, among other states, both of which were enemies at the time, right? And could have an enormous impact not only on the food population balance, but also on the world balance of power. The White House bought off on the global cooling / climate change scam. And by December 1974, taxpayer dollars were permanently extorted by the scientists. By the early 1980s, the global cooling scam had seamlessly morphed into a global warming scam. The climate mafia now denies the global cooling scam ever happened, saying it consisted of 9 paragraphs in Newsweek in 1975. Climate criminals assume that everyone else is stupid and will believe anything they say. There is nothing new about this whatsoever. Scientists have been pulling the same climate change scam for centuries. And so then he has, this was really interesting, the origins of the global warming threat. And this comes from the first global revolution. This is out of, here, let me just read this. Club of Rome, 1991. And searching for a new enemy to unite us, we came up with the idea that pollution, the threat of global warming, water shortages, famine, and the like would fit the bill. In their totality and in their interactions, these phenomena do constitute a common threat which demands the solidarity of all peoples. But in designating them as the enemy, we fall into the trap about which we have already warned, namely mistaking symptoms for causes. All these dangers are caused by human intervention, and it is only through changed attitudes and behavior that they can be overcome. The real enemy then is humanity itself. And this is where, again, I want to bring the point back to the climate change narrative, this meta-narrative as a religious orientation that ultimately is a house of cards led by the father of lies, whether people are part and parcel or know about the full extent of all this stuff or not. And certainly I'm no climate scientist. I'm not claiming to be. But it's interesting how everything that is associated with it is anti-human. Impossible meat, right? You need to stop eating meat. I have an article we're going to show you that you need to stop eating meat. I have an article by 2 scholars, one including Richard Dawkins, that says to save the environment, you need to eat human lab-grown meat. You need to eat humans, cannibalism. Again, reverting back to the sins of the Old Testament, reverting back to the undermining of Christianity and back to a pagan pre-Christian world. And so that's where this religious narrative is so interesting, because it is innately anti-human, anti-life, anti-family, anti-reproduction. They want you to have abortions. They want you to depopulate. They want you to have, let me just put it as non-sexually reproductive relationships with people. And so here is one, too. This was what I was telling you guys before. The religious cult honors their icon. I had no idea that Greta Thunberg received an honorary doctorate from a Finnish university. And here it is. Greta Thunberg was among the 8 honorary doctorates given by the university's faculty of theology. And here's her, again, with a icon-like painting or with a halo around her head that says, "Our house is on fire." Of course. And then here's a really interesting one on that, again, is from Tony Heller on the 50 years of failed apocalyptic forecast. Academics have been forecasting doom for my entire life. Needless to say, it hasn't happened, and we are still here. And a perfect example is Al Gore talking about how Manhattan would be underwater. It's not. And again, Venice, the water levels are the same. A few days after we landed on the moon 50 years ago, Stanford professor Paul Ehrlich forecast that we would disappear in a cloud of blue steam within 20 years. Elric is John Holden's close associate, and Holdren was Obama's science advisor. So again, here's some articles. Let me make sure I share this article with you guys. Remind me if I forget, because as we go through, I get caught up. I forget to share the link. And again, see how he has the hyperlinks where you can go back and see all this stuff as well. A year later, he predicted that we would run out of food and water within a decade. He wanted to poison Africans in order to save them from overpopulation. Sound familiar? I wonder if they'd ever create a pandemic and try to poison people that way. Dire famine forecast by 1975. A few years later, the immensely likable Ehrlich jumped on the global cooling bandwagon, in which we just covered. Obama and Holdren were both pushing global cooling before they started pushing global warming. Their real agenda was to cut off the fossil fuel supply, which they were blaming on the global cooling. Again, because energy is essential here. Oil is naturally occurring. And again, part of this satanic, demonic meta-narrative is about the power. People in power are trying to control energy. And so they're creating new energy sources through, again, what I'm claiming is like a sort of theurgic relationship with these natural gods, these pagan gods, to control our civilization. And that if nations were able to have oil and be able to be energy independent, like, you know, would be ideal here in the United States, we could dictate our own future. We could be self-governing. But of course, that is what they don't want, because this is all moving towards a one world agenda. 20 years later, he wanted to prosecute climate skeptics. Howard government's hardline stance against legally binding limits on greenhouse gas emissions was criminal and a gamble with the well-being of future generations, according, again, Paul Ehrlich. And 50 years after his first failed prediction of doom, he is still at it. So here he is again. Biologist Paul Ehrlich gives dire prediction for global civilization. That's 2013. The global cooling scare was ubiquitous for academics. The world's leading climate experts wrote a letter to President Nixon, which we saw in 1972, warning of a new ice age in about a century. You can see all these articles. There's tons of them. Director of the National Center for Atmospheric Research and his leading scientists were pushing global cooling. No surprise there. And climate experts wanted to melt the Arctic to stop the global cooling. You see how they want to put, again, silver iodine in the atmosphere. Bill Gates wants to wants to, basically create his own biosphere around the planet that's going to prevent sun from entering our ecosystems to prevent it from warming up anymore. I mean, these people are possessed by a demonic agenda to not save the planet, but to destroy it. President Carter warned that we would run out of oil at the beginning of the 20th century. Wrong. I think they meant the 21st century. By the end of the 1970s, academics started to move on to new panics, nuclear meltdown, for example. In 1979, experts said global warming would produce a new ice age. Acid rain was going to kill us if famine, global cooling, and nuclear meltdown and peak oil didn't. Global cooling caused droughts and floods. Now they are caused by global warming. But times changed. During the 1980s, the UN warned that global warming would kill us by the year 2000. Of course, that didn't happen either. So again, you guys can check out the rest of that article there. This is just another website of somebody talking about Tony Hiller's work. So I'll share that link in case you guys didn't catch the first one. So just check that out. And so here's one talking about how global warming is the greatest scam in history, claims the founder of the Weather Channel. Interesting piece of information there. And of course, as we listened to in the video with Alex Jones, the gentleman was highlighting that these, like the National Weather Institute and NOAA, they are controlled and gagged by these federal organizations. And so they have to put forward a particular narrative. This is real interesting how climate colonialism is depriving Africa of essential energy, right? The whole point about global climate change, right, is about equity, saving the planet, getting equitable distribution of goods and services across the planet, saving the third world, right? That the third world is flooding into the first world because of climate change. Well, this article pretty well documents, and here I'll share this with you guys, that the exact opposite is happening. Is that these Western, particularly the UN, is actually making it more difficult and depriving Africa of essential energy because it's forcing it to go green. So again, an anti-human agenda. Here's Bezos. This was more recent. This is just from yesterday, October 21st. And this is a great website. It's called Climate Change Dispatch, your science and environmental news source. If you've never heard of it, I would recommend checking it out. They have really, really solid articles. And this is talking about how Bezos owned Washington Post uses Bezos' other funded climate change group to link global warming to all the severe weather. So Hurricane Helene, Hurricane Milton, the fires in Wyoming. Oh, all this stuff has to do with climate change, guys. And who's telling us about it? Well, it's actually the WAA, the World Weather Attribution, which was founded in 2014 to produce research linking extreme weather to climate change. So it's literally being funded to just tie any natural event back to climate change. And then they refer it as to legitimate that everything is referring back to climate change. And so the group found a friend in Amazon founder Jeff Bezos in 2022 and announced a $10 million grant to WWA and two other organizations to scale effective communications on the links between climate change and extreme weather, which of course we know that they themselves are creating and contributing to the extreme weather through their technologies. And here's one meteorologist, despite media claims, no evidence that climate change is driving immigration. That's strange. We're told that the reason why they're having to flood first world nations is due to war, which again, these Western nations, the EU, the UN, America, we're creating the catastrophes, which then these people flee from into the first world nations where they get all the social benefits and welfare. And this article is documenting how global climate change has nothing to do with all this major mass immigration around the world. And then here's one I just wanted to highlight because I couldn't believe that people still believe oil comes from dinosaur bones. This is a blog on the State Historical Society of North Dakota dismissing this stupid narrative, how oil actually is naturally producing. Again, I'm not even endorsing its method, but it's claiming that it comes from the seabed floors. Organic material falls down there. It gets embedded into, it's covered up with rock. And then essentially it, through heat and pressure, forms into oil. And then the oil then moves up towards the surface. And this is why then people are drilling for oils. They're trying to break the kind of the cap, the rock cap of these different places where the oil is trying to get to the surface. And so then the oil literally will spout out. So, no, oil does not come from dinosaurs. Here, I'll share this link. I didn't think I shared it with you guys. And then here's one. Scientists suggest eating human meat to tackle climate change. This is a Swedish scientist has suggested eating human flesh to tackle climate change at a Stockholm summit, according to reports. In the 1973 dystopian film Soylent Green, the world is so overpopulated that dead bodies are sold as food. Huh, interesting. But Swedish researcher Magnus Soderlund believes this could be a genuine solution to climate change and asserts we must awaken the idea of eating human flesh in the future. Again, what did I show you guys? That cannibalism was actually part of FDA says I can't believe people still believe in dinosaurs. Agreed. This guy's literally advocating you to eat human flesh to depopulate because we have to save the planet. And this is reiterated by yours truly, Richard Dawkins. He mulls that taboo against cannibalism ending as lab-grown meat improves. And here, he's arguing against the taboo of cannibalism. He says, tissue culture, clean meat already in 2018. The British author of The Selfish Gene asked March 3rd, I've long been looking forward to this. What? What if human meat is grown? Could we overcome our taboo against cannibalism? An interesting test case for consequentialist morality versus yuck reaction absolutism. And again, references Soylent Green as well. And he says, I don't think I could get past the cannibalism too, not because of absolutism, but because of sheer visceral reaction. And I think a lot of people would be the same way. Oh, one person said, though, not Dawkins. I'd say it would be a gag for sure. And then here's his Twitter post talking about lab-grown human meat for sale by the end of 2018. This was posted in 2018, March 3rd, 2018. Here's an article talking about the UN climate change reports that we need to stop eating red meat and really meat in general. And so I don't pay to get the rest of this article, but I was just bringing it, and there's tons of them. This is Nature. That's why I grabbed it. Nature is supposed to be a premier website and journal, right? One of the highest, apparently one of the highest academic scientific journals. And it's telling that you have to eat less meat, guys. David Attenborough, your favorite voice over your animal documentaries and Planet Earth, says the planet can't cope with overpopulation, right? So interestingly enough, do you see what website this is from? The World Economic Forum. The World Economic Forum. That is where this website or this article is from. This is from 2018, October 9th, 2018. But it's very alarming at the rate we are going. And although people will say in the long run we are going to stabilize, they're going to stabilize, as far as I can see, at a rather higher level than the Earth. Can we really accommodate? Roughly 83 million people are added to the world's population each year, according to the UN, with modern advances in medicine and nutrition to thank for their survival into adulthood and old age. Now, Elon Musk has kind of been outspoken that we are facing a depopulation event, and it's been arguing that we are not in threat of any overpopulation. Not here to promote Elon Musk. I got my own problems with him, especially his Neuralink and transhumanism agenda. But very interesting to point out. Here's another one, David Attenborough. If we didn't limit our population growth, the natural world will. We have to limit our population growth or nature will do it for us. Well, if nature's going to do it for us, then why do we have to do it? What's the big deal? I don't see what the problem is. And then here's the article about on bestiality, as I showed you guys earlier. Here's one: ancient child sacrifice and abortion. This is a really interesting article from Associates of Biblical Research. I assume that is probably a Protestant organization. I'm not sure. But I bring it up because it talks about the parallels of abortion and child sacrifice. And I'll just read this first section here. At the risk of, on the one hand, pointing out the obvious parallels, and on the other hand, suggesting parallels that some may say are forced, we compare the ancient practice of child sacrifice with the modern practice of abortion. However, before going any further, it should be noted that the parallels between the two have been recognized for centuries. The church father Tertullian of Carthage, and Carthage being a pagan center of Moloch worship, for those of you who aren't aware, Carthage was in northern Africa, or I guess is in northern Africa, renamed. And that was the epicenter of Moloch worship. And commenting on the Roman practice of infanticide by comparing it to the Carthaginian practice of child sacrifice, Tertullian says, there is no difference as to baby killing, whether you do it as a sacred rite or just because you choose to do it. For us, Christians, murder is once for all forbidden. So even the child in the womb, while yet the mother's blood is still being drawn on it from the human being, it is not lawful to destroy. To forbid birth is only quicker murder. It makes no difference whether one take away the life once born or destroy it as it comes to birth. He is a man who is to be a man. The fruit is always present in the seed. And so, again, I think I shared this link. Yeah, I already did. But this is a great little article talking about, so here is, you can see Carthage right here. You can see my mouse, the northern point of Africa here. This was, again, the epicenter of Moloch worship. And so I'll just read some of the conclusions. Actually, it's a little long, but like child sacrifice in ancient Egypt, or ancient Israel, the practice of abortion by Christians is spiritual prostitution to an idol. It defiles God's sanctuary and profanes his holy name. God alone is the author of life. It is not the creature's prerogative to question the creator's wisdom in bringing life of a fellow human being at conception. Again, the same thing is true with overpopulation. God is in control of life. And so who is to say we're being overpopulated or we have an overpopulation problem when it's God who allows the people to be born? Whenever men disregard their creator's wise judgment by destroying his innocent creation, they are serving another God. Exactly. That's the point being made today about the God of climate change. They are, in fact, spiritually prostituting themselves to the idolatrous self whom they believe is wiser in its value judgments. Some values which are put forward to justify abortion are clearly idolatrous. EEIG, example given, the mother's right to choose, which is placed at the top of the pyramid of values by those who want to call themselves pro-choice. Other idolatrous values are more subtle. Empathy for a mother's suffering in the midst of the crisis arising from an unwanted pregnancy, or concern for the quality of life of a defective fetus. Both of these later values are good in themselves, but become idolatrous when they abrogate the creator's wise judgment in creating human life. It is not as though God fails to realize in creating some human beings that they may become a source of conflict in an unplanned conception, or that a handicapped person will indeed face difficulties. So this is, again, a great article. I'd read I'll finish this right here. Often abortion is the evil solution to the consequences of sexual sin, of course, which, again, the climate change narrative and progressive narrative in general promotes sexual sin, and then promotes you killing the child once it begins to gain life, the fetus. Whether a pregnancy results from fornication or adultery, where the mother is guilty of participation in the sin, or a pregnancy results from rape or incest, where the mother usually is a guiltless victim or another's sin, abortion is an ungodly solution. So just want to put that out there. This is this is from the BBC News, the official history of climate change. And I just wanted to show you, it says nothing about global freezing, global cooling. So you'd think, okay, we were just reading about all this stuff going on in the 1970s. Interesting. It just talks about human population reaches 5 billion. Human population reaches 4 billion, right? Carbon emissions from fossil fuel burning the industry reach 6 billion tons per year. You go further, they highlight every major natural event was done by climate change. Human population reaches 6 million. Human population reaches 7 million, 2011. So they're really keen to tell you that we're overpopulated, but for some strange reason, they don't mention the period of climate cooling, global cooling. Huh. Interesting. Here's another article, or let me share that BBC one with you guys so you have it. And then here's global warming fraud basics. This is a really well done presentation on all the graphs showing that what they're telling you about the ice caps is totally false, and that the ice caps are actually expanding. The forests are actually repopulating and growing like the Amazon. And so, yeah, you can check that out. I went through it earlier. Very interesting. It's pretty long article, or actually, no, that was all the comments. So check that out for yourself. This is totally unrelated, but I found it on Tony Heller's website, and it's a documentation of Donald Harris, Kamala Harris's father, and how he was actually fired as a Marxist economist, as a professor at one of his universities, and these public articles referred to him as a radical professor. So totally divorced from today's conversation, but I found that and I kept it on there. I thought maybe I exited out, but I'll share that with you guys if you ever want to check it out. Pretty interesting. That is her father, who was part Jamaican, part Irish. And he was a Marxist professor at Stanford University. Patriarchy is killing our planet. Women alone can save her. This is The Ecologist, which is a very popular website online, talking about how patriarchy is the reason for global climate change, and that we then need to elevate women to solve the crisis. Again, everything you would expect. Poverty is gendered. One of the clearest manifestations of systematic disempowerment of women is poverty. Nearly 1 billion people live below the poverty line, defined by the World Bank as an income of $1 and 25 cents a day. Well, I have an article somewhere around here that when Germany went totally green, I think it was in the 90s or early 2000, maybe it was 2006, 6 or 7. The people that were most affected and harmed by green energy were the poor. So again, very ironic here. This whole thing is about how men are at fault. So I will share that with you. Here's one on how wind farms actually cause more environmental impact than previously thought. And I have on my document that I began the stream with and was talking, going over in regards to paganism and Christianity and all this different stuff. The last two sections I have are actually all the negative impacts of wind energy and solar energy. So I'm not going to cover all that stuff right here. If somebody wants, they can let me know if you want me to pull it up. But it's actually quite interesting that the wind and solar energy does quite a bit of harm to the environment at the same time they're trying to protect it. And so that's what this article is talking about, is how environmental researchers have found that wind energy has pretty negative effects, especially with ecosystems wherever they're placed. And I found an article right here. This was really interesting. Adverse health effects of industrial wind turbines. I found so many articles talking about how there's no health detriments of living next to wind turbines. This is a conspiracy theory. This is a right-wing propaganda. And yet I found a PubMed article out of Canada, which proves that Canadian family physicians can expect to see increasing numbers of rural patients reporting adverse effects from exposure to industrial wind turbines. Now, if you just put up wind turbines, negative health side effects, you'll see all these articles saying that this is a conspiracy theory. But what this research has showed is that that the symptoms included decreased quality of life, annoyance, stress, sleep disturbance, headaches, anxiety, depression, and cognitive dysfunction. Some have felt anger, grief, and a sense of injustice. And it's telling that that caregivers need to understand the plight of these people because they're frustrated that when they go to the various health services, they are ignored or considered like wacko. So very interesting. Not only does it disrupt wind turbines, disrupt the environment. Obviously, there's like this one's. This is well, what's killing the whales off the northeast coast? It's not wind farm projects. Experts say it's definitely not the wind farms. When this was the one that I found the most propaganda on regarding dolphins and whales being affected by these wind farms off the coast. And I just grabbed this because this says that it's not true, right? The whole thing is talking about how these have no detrimental effects on whales, and yet whales are washing up on shore around these wind farms, which is not a historical phenomenon. Very, very interesting. So the wind turbines, it affects people's health. It clearly is affecting marine wildlife. And it destroys natural wildlife. For example, the article here, let me just show you guys real quick. The article that I put together, the little document that I put together, it talks about how it's actually destroying bats, that wherever these wind turbines are put in place. So let me show down here. So here's the problems with solar energy. I highlighted all these different problems that I found. And then when you get to wind energy, bat mortality. Bats are highly susceptible to wind turbine collisions. Obviously, bats don't have great vision. They, like mammals in the ocean, they use sonar, and that they're attracted to the movement and noise of the turbines, mistaking them for water or food sources. And the rapid air pressure changes around the moving blades can also cause internal injuries to bats, even if they do not directly collide with the blades. So endangered bird species are being affected. Bats, I know in one place in the US, I saw something about people were concerned with eagles and like major large predatory birds, like bald eagles, were being hit by these wind turbines. And so habitat destruction, noise pollution, impact on marine ecosystems, which again, you're told that's a conspiracy theory, guys. That does not exist whatsoever. Of course, it's aesthetic terrorism. Carbon footprint of manufacturing installation, waste and recycling challenges, energy storage and grid, all that different stuff. So if you guys want to read more of that, you can go to my website. Everything in that document will be posted there. So moving forward, this is where the state of California, I found on the official website of california.gov, that they are talking about cloud seeding openly. So across hundreds of mountaintops from the Sierra, see if you guys can you guys see this? Let me zoom in. Across hundreds of mountaintops from the Sierra Nevada to the Swathus, cloud seeding experts are now often burning small amounts of silver iodide with the aim of bolstering dwindling water supplies. The vaporized metal particles are ideal kernels for new ice crystals. When moist, super cold air arises over mountain ranges under predictable winds, it sets up perfect conditions for the crystalline alchemy. Don't you love that? Alchemy that creates snow, the white gold carved by ski resorts, ranchers, and farmers, and even distant cities that need mountain water to survive. The scramble for water has intensified as global warming has battered much of the West during the last 20 years with heat waves, droughts, and wildfires. The projections for declining snowpack and river flows, cloud seeding is becoming a regional climate adaptation measure costing several $1 million each year. Rainmaking in Dubai. Some of you guys may have been aware that cloud seeding in Dubai was happening. Well, this was this year. Yeah, August of this year. At least this article was. But earlier this year, there was a major torrential flood. Like the amount of water, more rain occurred in Dubai than happens in the entire year. More than that. And it caused this major flood in Dubai. And it was all due to, again, man manipulating the weather through cloud seeding. Here is a very interesting, again, the dark side of solar panels. This is talking about solar trash wave and how difficult it is to get rid of solar panels. And so the entire solar panel industry is about improving, right? So a solar panel lasts anywhere between like 15 and 30 years, and then it has to be replaced. But the problem with solar panels is all the minerals and stuff it has in it are actually toxic to the environment. And so how you get rid of old solar panels is becoming a serious problem. So if you guys want to check out that article, you can check that out there. I also found an article, I think it was Tony Heller, and I don't think I have it up, but it was discussing how, maybe I do, we'll find out as we go through. It was discussing how we're told that global temperatures are increasing more and more and more, and that it was one study specifically on Washington, D.C., and he showed that the highest heat wave in Washington, D.C. was in 1911, and that they've actually been getting cooler and cooler each year. See if I can find that. I'm not sure if I have it up, but here is climate change worship is nothing more than rebranded paganism. I'm not the only one who thinks that. I'm sure many of you guys think about that as well. The Church of Mother Earth. I should have titled the stream that, the Church of Mother Earth. Electric vehicles scar the environment. Moving energy costs harms the earth more than you know. So it talks about the mineral mining for these electric cars, and the energy it takes to actually charge your electric vehicle is more than it is just to put regular unleaded fuel into your combustion engine. And of course, there was something, what was it? The World Economic Forum. There was an article, I forget which stream, it was a long time ago, maybe 3 years ago, but they had an article talking about how even once we get to all electric cars, not everybody's going to be able to have an electric car because of the impact electric cars have on the environment. They're going to be reserved for just a few people. And when you travel, you're going to have to do it collectively, like public transportation, which will be electric. Here's an article on impossible meat. Is it bad for you? And this article talks about all the ingredients that are inside these impossible meats and how it's actually not more nutritious or better for you than actual meat. How preventing unwanted pregnancies can help on climate. So this one's advocating for, again, aborting children to preserve the environment, as you would expect. And they're educating, looks like maybe Hispanic or Southeast Asian women, I'm not sure, on, again, why here. Voluntary family planning is too often ignored as a means to lower carbon emissions. But by making reproductive technologies more freely available, we can reduce global population and human-caused emissions in a manner that is consistent with personal liberties. Aha. Human sacrifice for weather control. This was actually right here. This was an article, Germany's green power program. So this is what I was talking about, human sacrifice, and actually crushed the poor. And so Feynman, Obama, and other admirers of the German green energy strategy fail to see that it has come at the expense of sky-high electricity rates. And of course, Germany was trying to nullify some of their energy costs by the Nord Stream 2 pipeline, the pipeline where they were getting oil from Russia, which of course the U.S. blew up with their war with Russia. That's kind of has a veneer that it's Ukraine versus Russia. Of course, we all know it's U.S. and the EU versus Russia. But anyways, again, does the exact opposite. Green power does the exact opposite than what they're told us that it's supposed to do. Here are some theories of definitions of religion. How climate change affects the LGBTQ community. I found articles on how the reason why we have to stop climate change is because it affects LGBTQ people, and that they're the most disenfranchised by the changing climate. And so it is important to note that not everyone on the planet will experience the burden of climate change if we don't take steps to end the climate crisis. However, minority communities, especially people of color and LGBTQ plus communities, are disproportionately affected by the environmental harms caused by air pollution, water pollution, rising sea levels. Show me that they're rising. Food insecurity and plastic pollution. Oh. And then here's something I found on New Mexico University.edu. Climate change is an LGBTQ issue. And this whole thing is about a whole document. I mean, look at, it's hideous. These are the facts. The LGBT community is one of the marginalized groups of people who are being disproportionately affected by climate change. The climate change movement will thrive with the voices and power of the LGBTQ community. Oh, wow. The internalization of social stigma among minor attracted persons. Implication. This is an article from PubMed talking about how we need to deal with the social stigma of pedophiles. Climate change is a matter of worship. This is one of these progressive Christian groups. Of course, they're always written by women. This is written by Jessica for ARRCC's 2012 Youth Assembly. That is Australians' religious response to climate change group. As a Christian, I am extremely concerned with the apathy many people, particularly Christians, employ when thinking of climate change. As such, I write chiefly to my Christian brothers and sisters who do not consider climate change a matter of worship. So again, you can see the progressive ethos, even within Christianity, wanting to undermine our traditional morality and our traditional theology in favor of this meta-narrative of climate change. New worship songs for climate change and creation care, again, written by Joanne. And so the songs and hymns listed are presented in 5 categories: praising our Creator, creating space for confession and lament, sent out with hope in God's promises, songs that include all 3 themes: praise, lament, and hope, and general songs rich in creation imagery. Our 2017 anointed list of worship songs about the care for creation remains so popular that we have compiled a new list of worship songs to lament climate change and encourage creation care. This was an article that I found on the Transhumanist Party. This is their political party for transhumanists, which is talking about how the Transhumanist Party offers a bold vision, harnessing technology and science to overcome significant threats. Enough is enough. It's the time for change. Let's embrace a future of innovation, progress, and hope. And this was talking about climate and condemning Trump and Republicans for not caring about the environment. This is kind of unrelated, but an article that I found that was kind of sickening is that human babies were found being scalped alive by the NIH-funded University of Pittsburgh research dubbed Nazi-level evil. This was actually a little bit hard to stomach, and I found this actually verified by other websites. So this is not just some blog post, but this was actually something that was going on at the University of Pittsburgh. In one instance, Frankenstein scientists at Pitt sliced off baby's scalp and implanted it onto the back of a laboratory rat to see if it would grow any hair. That research was published in the Nature journal, pictures included, which we're not going to look at. If you guys want to see it, you can check it out. But yeah, pretty disgusting stuff. American women's death and suicide capsule leads to arrest in Switzerland. So I was looking at these suicide pods, right, that are kind of all over the news. And now they have these new climate change ones where it's like the seed of a tree. And so you get in there like a casket and then you voluntarily off yourself. And then they bury you in the ground and a tree will grow. And this is like a climate change option to what they call like self-euthanasia. Well, one woman went to Switzerland where this is legalized, these pods here that you can see, and she voluntarily killed herself. And the state of Ohio, which is not a fan of it, is now actually leading, or they have a warrant for the arrest of the people in Switzerland that actually create these things and that allowed this woman to kill herself. So she was a 64-year-old woman, and she had been having severe immune compromise problems, and she was kind of done with her suffering. And so she wanted to off herself, and she went to Switzerland. And in the US, the state of Ohio said no, and they have issued an arrest warrant for these people. And then here's the true history of Moloch, the ancient god of child sacrifice, of which you guys already know. And I covered it in a previous stream, but I'm not going to bring it up in this one. If you guys are aware of the Jewish celebration of Moloch at Soldier Field in Chicago, Illinois, that there was a Jewish parade festival in which they did a mock sacrifice to Moloch. You guys can find that if you go on. I don't know if it's on YouTube. If you go on like Rumble or BitChute or Odyssey, you'll be able to find that video. And let's see. Should you not have kids because of climate change? It's complicated. And so this is another article. Some researchers have claimed that the best thing to do for the environment is to have fewer children. The truth is more complicated. And so the irony, right, is that they flood the first world with more people because we don't have enough children. And then they tell you not to have enough children to save the environment. Well, which one is it? And the last one is having kids making climate change worse. A growing number of Americans are avoiding having children because of climate change concerns. But how much do kids really impact the human carbon footprint? So again, just to round out today's conversation, guys, the God of climate change, I mean, the idea here is that it's a meta narrative. It's a religious meta narrative that is ultimately anti-human. It's focused on depopulation, not having children. It's an anti-natalist movement. And ironically, there's this weird connection between the people promoting climate change and weather manipulation, deforestation, fires, and the pursuit to mine like rare minerals. And so I pointed to the example that one of our friends, shout out to Charzanis if he watches this, living in Greece and talking about how very strange things are occurring in Greece where they're going into the woods and finding like huge setups of gasoline that could explode or somebody could deliberately do. Often, sometimes climate activists, but sometimes in the Greek context, Turks, potentially Muslims that set forest on fire and then it spreads and destroys entire forests. And then the government comes in and says, oh, that's terrible. Well, we're getting ready to now build a wind farm right there. And so there's this interesting theurgic sort of technological dimension here where climate change is all about these new renewable green energy. And yet at the same time, these energy systems are actually detrimental to the environment that we're told they're trying to save. And meanwhile, we're told that oil is bad. And we know for a fact that it produces more carbon, but carbon is good for vegetation. It's good for trees. It's good for crops. The more carbon there is, the more that it can take in through photosynthesis and produce more oxygen. So trees actually give us cleaner air, and carbon emissions and more carbon dioxide in the atmosphere is creating more trees. You think, well, actually that's a unique feedback loop that God created in which we discovered oil. And in fact, maybe, and I'm not saying we aren't polluting our environments. We are in certain ways. Absolutely. Monsanto, pesticides, chemicals in the water. Of course, we need to get rid of all that stuff. I'm not here to say there aren't problems with pollution in the environment. My point is saying that this grand meta narrative of climate change is actually a religious orientation, and it's doing the opposite of what they're telling you. It's an anti-humanist movement that is actually destroying the environment on purpose in certain ways so that it can control energy resources, that it can control populations, and that it can control nation states. And that is ultimately evil. And so we see tied with the climate change is many of these attributes that are associated with paganism that Christianity undermined. And I mentioned them again in the opening of today's video. That is bestiality, human sacrifice, pedophilia, homosexuality, transgenderism, and that this polytheism, this animism and nature worship, rituals of sacrifice, and diversity of sexual displays and orientations. This is part of this pagan tradition, which is actually all associated with the climate change agenda as well. And so it's very, very interesting that climate change has beliefs and dogmas, ethical framework, salvation narrative, prophets and saviors, rituals and community, and sacred texts and teachings, all of which are under a totemic symbol of the earth. And it seems like it really is a sort of subtle religious orientation that people don't fully understand, especially in the Western world. So that concludes my stream today, guys. Smash that like. I hope you found it insightful and interesting. And I will see if there's any more super chats. Shout out to Justin Henley. He throws in $2. Says, I refuse to eat human meat. Yeah, me too, bro. What if I get the butt? Yeah, well, I wouldn't want that either. It sounds like it tastes like ass. And another super chat came in over on the Streamlabs. Shout out to Harry Serpanos, mother. He throws in $5 and says, good Orthodox overview. Thanks, DPH. Carbon is the foundation of organic chemistry, life. Exactly, Harry. And it isn't a pollutant. Exactly. That's why this whole narrative is an anti-demonic, an anti-human demonic agenda to control. Only a Luciferian mind would think this. Exactly. I couldn't agree more. And Harry Serpanos throws in another $1. He says, study photomolecular effect leading to water evaporation exceeding thermal limit. Science isn't settled. This happens in the atmosphere where green light can break hydrogen bonds in the clouds, increasing water vapor and affecting greenhouse gas effect. Great point. I'm not familiar with any of that, but thank you very much, Harry, for supporting the stream and sending that in. And then let me just check the dono chat. Doesn't look like anything's up at the dono chat. So anyways, like I said, that's going to conclude my stream. Let's see. Dr. Emmy says CO2 is only 0.04% of Earth's atmosphere. I know it's amazing. It's amazing how this entire narrative has led people to be essentially anti-life, right? That's what the meta narrative is. Carbon is life. The antinatalism, the anti-humanism, the promotion of abortion and overpopulation and death. This is really a total religious system against life itself. And Storm the Cat just threw in $10 and said, thank you so much, Storm the Cat. He says, I read that Moloch is the Canaanite version of the Greek Kronos or Roman Saturn. And the Star Trek, the Killigan homeworld is called Kronos, and they are extremely aggressive and bloodthirsty species. Well, that makes sense. I've never really watched Star Trek, but that definitely connects on my mind. So thank you so much, Storm the Cat, for the $10 super chat. I do appreciate that, my brother. And anyways, guys, I'm going to go spend time with my wife and relax for the evening. So again, thank you all for being here. Thank you for the support for everybody who supported. I appreciate it. Grant Modern Life just said, super fire stream indeed. Thank you very much, Grant. I hope you liked it. And I will be back not tomorrow. We have a members meeting tomorrow, and I may be meeting with Rachel and Andrew. They may be coming through Indianapolis, so I may be seeing them Thursday. But I have a couple streams lined up. Obviously, I have some sponsored streams I got to finish work on. I have a really interesting stream I can't wait to do on an Orthodox priest, Daniel Sisoev, and his discussion. It's an audiobook on the problems with Islam. I plan on doing one on that. And shout out to Father Deacon Dr. Ananias. He actually sent me a video that was really interesting on the gender agenda, which is talking about the whole sexual debacle with transgenderism and all that different stuff. And it was done by a Catholic, and it's about probably about an hour 20, hour 30 long. But I was thinking about doing a little bit of an overview and playing that for you guys. So I will definitely be back by Friday, and we'll definitely be doing a stream on Sunday. So thank you guys so much for your support. Again, if you want to get access to my documents, those are all up at the website for $5. And if you want to support my work, please become a website member. I'd greatly appreciate that. So I'll see you guys in the next one. As always, until then, God bless.